Hello and welcome, my friends and viewers, to this week's episode of Legendlore, where I draw and talk about monsters, characters, gods, and other things from D&D 5th edition, all while giving a small but quickly digestible history about them. Together we'll go over their history within the game, how they're utilized in the modern edition, and how you guys can utilize them in your own games. To pair with last week's video covering Shar the Night Singer, we will be covering her twin sister, sworn enemy, and cosmological antithesis, Selune the Moonmaiden. Now, warning for this video and the entire art piece as a whole, both will include spoilers for Baldur's Gate, especially Shadowheart's story and romance plot specifically. So if you've not reached that far yet, or if you don't want to have that spoiled for you, I recommend skipping this video and checking out some of the other great content that we have on the channel. With all that out of the way, let's jump right in. Selune, or Selune as some people like to pronounce it, is the Forgotten Realms goddess of the moon and stars, journeys, and love, and her other titles besides the Moonmaiden include Our Lady of Silver, She Who Guides, the Moonmother, and the Night White Lady. Her alignment is listed as chaotic good, and her holy symbol is depicted as a pair of eyes surrounded by 7 stars, one of the more intricate types when it comes to the gods of Faerun. Her favorite animals are owls, her favorite monsters are song dragons, were-dragons, good-aligned lycanthropes, and shape-changers. Her preferred weapon is a heavy mace, her preferred mineral is moonstone, no surprise, and finally her favorite colors are that of blue and silver. Selune's portfolio primarily concerns the moon and stars, navigation and travel, wanderlust, the season of autumn, and the governance of aspects affected by the moon such as the oceanic tides or reproductive cycles. As such, those who commonly worship Selune were usually seafarers, travelers, midwives, adventurers, good-aligned lycanthropes as previously mentioned, and people in need of overall comfort or protection from life's great woes. In most of her appearances, Selune is often depicted in a variety of forms dependent on the moon's phase, taking on the mother, maiden, and crone aspect of gods such as the Celtic Morrigan or the Grecian Hecate. Her most common appearance was that of a beautiful tan-skinned woman with jade-green eyes and pure white hair that reached down to her knees. In her younger form, she would oftentimes have dark hair streaked with white, often wearing either a translucent gossamer dress formed of pure moonlight, or pale gray armor accentuated with lavender and blue robes. Her final form, which was the one most often encountered by unsuspecting mortals, was that of a plus-sized middle-aged woman with gray streaks in her hair and a motherly energy about her, often encountered at inns or other places of rest for the weary. Incidentally, she was also known for taking the form of dancing motes of light similar to will-o-wisps, in order to lead lost travelers through hazardous areas or to provide light for her followers while working in darker conditions. One of Selune's most important aspects is that, unlike other gods, her powers wax and wane alongside the moon itself, empowering and depowering her followers to coincide with the moon's phase. Selune is also believed to be one of the oldest gods in the known world of Faerun, created alongside her twin sister Shar from the raw primordial essence of existence conjured by an entity and over-god known as Ao. Beautiful, identical, but otherwise completely opposite, Selune bore silver hair while her sister's was dark, the two complementing one another and ultimately working to make order out of the chaos that surrounded them. From here on it gets very esoteric, but their shared efforts end up becoming the known realms, as well as the celestial bodies, and eventually the first goddess Shanti, who at the time was the whole embodiment of matter and existence in its entirety. And for a time there was a beautiful collaborative peace and love between the sisters, until Shanti wished to be able to foster life within existence. And it was at that time that Shar and Selune first became truly divided, resulting in the first days of an event known as the War of Light and Darkness. Selune and Shar argued and eventually warred over the fate of their creations, resulting in the cultivation of several universal concepts such as war, magic, death, disease, and eventually the gods who held domain over those same concepts. In time, Selune grew bold enough and utilized her power to reach beyond the known universe itself, emerging with an orb of pure heat and light from the elemental plane of fire that would come to be known as the sun. This would give the energy and qualities needed for Shanti to foster the life that she wanted, and would earn Selune the eternal true enmity and heartbreak of her sister Shar. The darkness that the Night Singer brought down upon the realm was great, and in a final gambit formed out of desperation, Selune collected her own divine essence and pointed it at her sister's encroaching shadows. Their primordial energies mixed and coalesced similarly to their early days of collaboration, and from this bond emerged an entity that would become the original goddess of magic, Mistral. This is distinctly separate from Mystra, but we'll get to that eventually. Mistral, being a sister of sorts to Shanti and an extremely powerful being in her own right, she was comprised of both darkness and light, creation and destruction. And while she initially sided with Selune in order to balance the powers that be, Mistral worked to get the sisters and their forces to enter into an uneasy truce, the nature of which is largely unknown, but resulted in Shar being cast into the darkness while light and life was allowed to flourish. The tearing of essence from herself left Selune incredibly weak and forever changed, her powers waxing and waning in a cycle throughout the ages, which forced her to form alliances with the gods from within and beyond the known planes. Meanwhile, Shar, who kept most of her power, was consumed by bitterness and loneliness, and forever promised to ensure that life would struggle to flourish, only putting aside her hatred one time in order to aid the other gods in the battle against Therisden and the Primordials in an event that would be known as the Dawn War. Due to the constant changing of phases, Selune's personality would change alongside them. One day she may be enthusiastic and passionate in her maiden form, and the next she could be retrospective, calm, and nurturing in her motherly aspect, before falling into the sorrowful melancholy of the crone. Regardless of her appearance and disposition, however, Selune was always constant with her care for others, her wish to avoid violence as a first approach, her deep sense of forgiveness, and her appreciation and acceptance of the chaos of ever-changing life. She taught others to accept and work within and alongside change, rather than remaining stoic and stagnant and risk never growing. She was also known to be extremely generous with her power and blessings upon not just her followers, but also on the common folk who were completely uninvolved with her. When showing her favor to her followers, she would often send owls, devout were-dragon servants, as well as other good lycanthropes. And for special occasions, she would call upon her planetar angels, known as shards. The presence of blue, silver, or moonstones was also indicative of her presence, a good example being a Selunite spy wearing a moonstone ring while pretending to be members of other clergy or cults, which could be an interesting angle for you dungeon masters to use. In terms of Selune's abilities as a goddess and when she manifested as an avatar of the material plane, she could perform a variety of magical feats, such as being a master of divinatory or abjuring spells, being a master combatant while wielding a heavy mace, and being able to banish evil extraplanar creatures with a single word. She was also heavily guarded against all forms of evil within 100 yards, a very distinct distance, and was also immune to all forms of enchantment, illusion, divination, and charming magic. Lycanthropes, given their attachment to the lunar cycle, were physically incapable of harming her, and Selune was also identified as the source of a type of energy known as moonfire, which is often used for rituals, the enchanting of magical items, and as a means to destroy undead. Lastly, Selune was also capable of sensing any deed that occurred beneath the light of the moon, meaning that during nights of the new moon, where it was not visible in the sky, she was considered to be almost completely blind. As such, this is when most of her enemies would enact their plans without her knowledge, such as the clergy of her twin sister and eternal enemy, Shar. In terms of Selune's relationships with other gods, her greatest allies include Mistral, who played a massive part in balancing the war between the two sisters, but often functioned as a rebellious daughter, Mistra, the future incarnation of Mistral that reformed after her subsequent deaths, who proved a lot more agreeable, as well as gods such as Illustre, Lyra, Suni, who she served under for a small bit of time while she recovered her power, Lathander, the elven moon goddess Seonine, who many believe was in the elven aspect of Selune, her daughter Shanti, Timora, Eldath, Corlin, and almost all of the other good aligned gods. When it comes to her enemies, her greatest foes beyond her sister Shar included gods like Mask, Moander, Umberlee, Targus, Therisden, and any other deity that stood against creation and the fostering of life. As mentioned before, Selune was also served by a selection of devoted planetar angels called shards, who acted as messengers, protectors, and celestial warriors in service of her cause. Speaking of which, when it comes to Selunite worship, the Moonmaiden's focus on compassion, acceptance, tolerance, healing, and guidance carried a wide appeal to people of all types, from commoners to nobles. She was also very popular with adventurers, sailors, lycanthropes who wished to maintain control over their affliction, and those who were seeking some sort of purpose to fulfill them. This coincided with the Church's focus on self-sufficiency, humility, and the building of one's inner strength and peace in order to help others. She also often served as a source of female empowerment, inspiring women to take up positions of power and prominence and pursue their dreams beyond what society urged them to do. Her guidance manifested in all sorts of forms, from guiding rich traders to merchants or helping sailors safely return home from a long journey. Incidentally, there was also the existence of a philosophy known as the Dark Moon Heresy, which we covered in our previous video on Shar. It largely focuses on how Selune and Shar are actually two facets of one entity as opposed to two separate ones, which is often met with hostility by both churches, but could be a very interesting avenue to explore. In terms of her distinct clerical orders, there were often described to be two types of Selunite follower: those who remained in temples, usually in urban or rural areas, and those who took their worship with them on the road as they wandered on pilgrimages without any distinct destination. With that said, here are a few of them that were the best known. First off, and one of my personal favorites, the Swords of the Lady was a fanatical order known for dressing all in white and having a very playful view of battle and combat, often resulting in others calling them lunatics. They were renowned for their zealotry and their swift and violent reprisals towards the actions of the goddess Shar and her church specifically. The Moon Knights, or the Banner of the Moon as I like to call them, were a militant order of crusaders and soldier priests dedicated to Selune, often known for having lycanthropes in their ranks who could better control their transformation due to their allegiance. And finally, there's the Silver Ladies, or Silver Maidens as I like to call them, which were an all-female order of healers, diviners, and defenders of both women and lycanthropes, often seen in conflict with monster hunters and abusers. For Selunites, it was important that they take on a role as a teacher or role model, especially when engaging in actual rites and rituals. While most of the clergy were okay with adapting to the rites and observances of the local area, materials and components such as milk, moonstone, wine, and the art of dancing were all essential parts of most rituals. Temple priests could provide healing and ceremonial rites such as marriages, and their temples could also serve as either asylums or sanitariums where the faithful could attempt to treat and heal those with a variety of afflictions, ranging from physical disease to mental illness. This did include things such as lycanthropy or memory manipulation imposed on others by the Church of Shar. When praying for their spells, clerics to Selune did so while facing the moon and only at times when it was visible, be it at night or during the day. During the full moon, however, female clerics would often perform mourning ceremonies in order to open themselves up spiritually, in the hopes of receiving special visions, intuition, and sometimes orders directly from the goddess. This would also be the time when the faithful felt closest to and most in tune with Selune. One of the more well-known rituals that Selunites practiced was the Night Stalk, in which a lone acolyte or a group of practitioners engaged in a designated activity in the hopes of communing with Selune directly. This could range from a simple lone walk during the night to celebratory dances and the taking of libations of milk and wine, during which Selune could sneak herself in and converse or join alongside her faithful, be it engaging in a moonlit philosophical talk while walking alongside the lone priestess, or being spotted as a random participant amongst the group dance. Secondly, there was the Mystery of Night, which was required to be performed by a priest at least once a year. The faithful would prostrate themselves before Selune's altar and cast secret spells that would send them into a deep trance, which some may interpret as a form of astral projection. From here, the priest would fly upwards and soar across the night sky before circling the moon itself, receiving distinct visions from Selune over the course of their journey before returning back to their physical body. This was incredibly draining for the practitioner, but would often endow them with information and insight that could allow them to plan out their next year of worship, pilgrimage, or good works. And lastly, there's the conjuring of the second moon, a ritual that only took place once every 4 years on the day of the leap year. Every temple of Selune would chant in carefully organized unison, and their collective power and devotion would allow them to summon the celestial planetar servants of Selune, the Shards. For this one night only, the Shards would do as the clergy wished to the best of their ability, such as combat their enemies or hunt down and slay the clergy of Shar. After this time, the Shards would select one mortal priestess to ascend amongst their ranks, with them becoming a Shard and forever serving the Moonmother as a divine celestial emissary. With the rituals covered, here are a couple of canon artifacts that are aligned with Selune that I found in my research, all of which Dungeon Masters can potentially introduce in their games. Moonblades were special +4 undead Bane longswords that drained the life out of its targets while leaving no physical wounds, being particularly effective against creatures risen from necromancy. The Amulet of Selune's Chosen, making an appearance in Baldur's Gate, is capable of healing wounds, but at the risk of causing someone to immediately fall into a deep sleep. Now that wouldn't be permanent, but it would be terribly inconvenient for the fighter to fall down unconscious in combat as a result of healing. Moon bracers, made out of leather and adorned with mother of pearl and moonstone, were capable of functioning as bracers of defense, but were also capable of casting the spell Dimension Door. Moon cloaks allowed Selunites to walk on both air and water while wearing them, using the spells of Levitate and Water Walk respectively. Moonfire Salve was a versatile substance that caused different effects based on where it was applied. If applied onto the eyes, it granted the user dark vision. If applied to the feet, it allows them to fly. If given to eat, it functions as a powerful cure wounds. And if put on the forehead, it functions as dispel magic. And if put on the hands, it allows for a more powerful casting of the Mage Hand spell. And finally, there's the Ring of Shooting Stars, which is a powerful artifact capable of casting spells such as Light, Fairy Fire, Ball Lightning, and even Meteor Swarm in the form of several falling stars. This could be an interesting legendary item to drop in a very high-level campaign. Now, when it comes to role-playing Selune, there's multiple approaches that you can take. As usual, I'll give the traditional depiction that I've gathered from other games and official lore, and then how I personally like to change it to fit my own style of DMing. While many may believe this to be an insult, Selune has a bleeding heart for the lost, hurt, and defenseless people of the realm, hence why she takes up the portfolio of guidance, healing, and protection under the eyes of the moon. As such, Selune is depicted as an empathetic, ever-hopeful, and uncommonly kind being, one of the few gods who actually touches down to the material plane to appear to mortals, be it directly or in one of her many disguises. They usually take the form of oracles, innkeepers, healers, and so on, providing a bit of advice and guidance to the people that she encounters during this time, namely your party of PCs. This version of Selune only wishes to help life and existence grow into its best self, and thus those that she helps will become strong enough to help others that they encounter, almost like a web of positive influence. She also seeks to fight against the malevolence and manipulation of her twin sister Shar, who seeks to undermine existence and make people yearn to return to the darkness of the void that they originated from. My biggest inspirations for this version of Selune would be Glinda the Good Witch from The Wizard of Oz, River Song from Doctor Who, and possibly Mary Poppins, depending on the day and how she's feeling. The second depiction, and the one I've developed for my game specifically that I want to share with you, is a little less perfectly good in comparison to the first one, drawing a bit more on the idea that Shar and Selune's war has a deeper meaning than just the good old classic dark versus light angle. Selune in the old days was perfectly okay with creating things with her sister Shar, seeing it as a bonding experience and a means to explore their power together. But when one of their own creations, Shanti, asked for something to be made to make their life better, that being life and warmth, Shar and Selune were torn on whether or not to ignore or grant the request. It was then that Selune, motivated by both her frustration with Shar and the pleas of Shanti, decided that she would try and create something for herself. And she did. She realized that she herself could actually create anything without her sister's permission or help, as she was just as powerful and free as her sister was. Selune then plunged into a creation frenzy, which was met with more anger by her sister and eventually culminated in the great war of concepts between the two of them. All this is to say, Selune's empathy for her creations caused her to almost abandon her sister and her cold refusal to better the lives of the things that they made, breaking the bond that the two had and warring against Shar's perceived restraints and limitations over what could or could not be made, so much so that she literally conjured the fucking sun from the plane of fire, and even greatly wounded herself just to try and get her sister to back off, resulting in the creation of the balancing goddess Mistra. Basically, Selune's wish to create, and by extension see her creations create, outweighed her loyalty to her sister, something that Shar greatly resents and is what caused the rift to emerge between them in the first place. Shar wishes for things to go back to the way things were, and if she removes all of these distracting creations from the board, maybe she'll finally get her sister back. Whereas on the flip side, Selune will do anything to never have to go back to obeying her sister's controlling wishes, and having to watch as something that she made suffers for the sake of balance. This Selune is willful almost to the point of being righteous, but only about fostering growth, freedom, and protecting the things that she cares about. Very big mama bear energy, no matter the form that she takes. She fights Shar's influence with the harshness of her rebellious younger sister, which resulted in their mortal followers having unfortunately interpreted as true lethal violence, something that maybe neither sister may have intended but sadly must now deal with. My biggest inspirations for this depiction of Selune are Buffy Summers from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Princess Merida from Brave, Pre-Season 8 Daenerys Targaryen from Game of Thrones, and Elizabeth Swann from Pirates of the Caribbean. All these serve more as inspiration for her motivations and intentions rather than her physical character. Now, if you have a PC who doesn't want to play a cleric but still wishes to be aligned with the Moonmother, here are a couple of ideas and subclasses that I feel can easily be aligned with her. For artificers, I've had several ideas regarding artillerists and armorers wielding moonstone-forged magical items, or alchemists who engage in Selune's witchy origins via herbalism or alchemy. For barbarians, there can be totem warriors and beast path barbarians aligned with nocturnal animals and lycanthropes, wild magic barbarians who scream while blasting beams of moonlight from their chests, and there's always the classic zealot barbarian cracking skulls with a moon-shaped mace. For bards, almost all subclasses fit in with Selune's tenets, but the colleges of creation, glamour, valor, and sword specifically are my personal recommendations, with their focus on experiencing the beauty of life and standing against villainy in all forms. For clerics, while Selune holds the twilight, knowledge, and life domains normally, I would also suggest adding the arcana, nature, light, and peace domains as well. I know this might be a lot for one god to hold, but Selune is one of the primordial powers of the realm, so she could be manifested in a variety of different forms. For druids, those of the Circle of Stars have a direct exchange with the goddess via star reading, and the Circle of the Moon's predisposition towards nocturnal behaviors can speak for itself. That, and also possibly flavoring the Circle of Wildfire's powers to wield moonfire could be very interesting. For fighters, samurai and cavaliers sworn to her service make perfect sense for Selune, as well as moon magic-powered Echo Knights, Arcane Archers, and Eldritch Knights. Perhaps you could even tie the phase of the moon to the level of power of those last three subclasses for some additional flavor. For monks, the Way of the Sun Souls mechanics could be reflavored to have them throwing out bolts of moonlight, in similar vein to the Light Cleric or spells like Moonbeam. And a Way of the Astral Self monks' psionic limbs can be flavored to be in the form of constellations. That's a concept that I personally have been really wanting to explore, but I figured I'd share it with you guys. For paladins, you could channel Selune's primordial power of light with an Oath of the Ancients. The Oath of Devotion is classically aligned with her virtues, and an ex-Sharan or a former servant of another evil entity can seek a new path free from their shadowy past with an Oath of Redemption. For Rangers, Beastmasters, Fey Wanderers, and Horizon Walkers all make sense. For Rogues, Moonlight-themed Arcane Tricksters, Soul Knives, and Phantom Rogues can all be great, as well as an adventurous swashbuckler who can live their life to the fullest in the Moonmaiden's name. For Sorcerers, the Lunar Magic Sorcerer is an obvious choice, but you can also reflavor the Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer to come from a Moonstone Dragon. And then there's the Divine Soul Sorcerer, which can be born directly from Selune's dalliances with mortals. For Warlocks, the best patrons to align with Selune would be Celestials, Archfey, and Hexblades, specifically in the form of a mace. You could also go for a Great Old One if you want to explore her more Eldritch aspects. And finally, for Wizards, almost every school can observe Selune's tenets, except maybe Necromancy and Enchantment due to their magics being the furthest from what she represents. Abjuration Wizards, however, may specifically best embody her protective nature. Now, when it comes to running Selunite NPCs and quests, due to Selune's great wide nature and comprehension of almost all concepts, Selunite clerics are less quest givers and more people who go on quests, if that makes any sense. They usually can be found traveling and adventuring and dealing with threats directly rather than outsourcing them to other people. So while most of Selune's quests would focus on fostering life and battling against her sister Shar, her NPCs would actually be encountered on the road, in caves, in dungeons, or anywhere else for your party to discover. Maybe a Selunite was captured and put into a prison while exploring a keep or stronghold. Or perhaps the party can follow them as they are already exploring a dungeon and disarming traps and doing all these own things in their own right. The positive of this is that you can encounter a Selunite NPC almost anywhere, which makes them very easy to kind of drag and drop wherever a dungeon master might need them. With that said, when it comes to Selunite NPCs rewarding their players for a completed quest or loot taken off of a Selunite enemy, here are a couple of items that I would personally recommend, so long as you give them the proper flavoring and being made out of silver, moonstone, or having iconography reminiscent of the moon and stars and all of its phases. And lastly, for our homebrew magic item this evening, we have the Moonmother's Lance, a +2 spear that requires attunement by a worshipper of Selune and deals an additional 1d6 radiant damage on a successful hit. This item has 5 charges, which can be used to cast the following spells by spending the appropriate amount, that being Moonbeam for 1 charge, Spiritual Weapon for 2 charges, and Divination for 3 charges. Additionally, while attuned to this weapon, the wielder gains advantage on all attacks made with this weapon while in moonlight, or against enemies who have been hit by the Moonbeam spell or the Spiritual Weapon spell, so long as that spell was cast using this weapon's charges. This is great for your clerics or paladins who are wandering into the middle of combat, and actually gives the wielder a little bit more motivation to actually use the charges of the weapon. All expended charges are regained on a long rest, and with that, that's our coverage of Selune, the Moonmother, everybody. I want to thank all of you guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, comment, and subscribe, and press the little bell icon to be notified of future videos. If you guys want a chance to vote on the next video and see the art pipeline and updates as they come, please check out the YouTube community tab and also follow me on social media on Instagram, Twitter, and also let me know how you guys have encountered Selune in your games, or for Dungeon Masters, how you guys have run Selune in your games, as well as what other things you guys would like to see me cover in future videos. But until then, I'll see you guys next time.